Viewer discretion is advised. This episode is based on actual events. The stories you're about to hear are based on real paranormal encounters reported by listeners. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is the spooky story episode where we're going to read a bunch of spooky stories from you guys. And also the bonus content this week, we're going to go over some of the world's most cursed items and their stories behind them. So if you want to see that, make sure you join the Patreon. But for now, let's get into the spooky stories. My university was in a historic city with old buildings and a past with Civil War history. Our dorm, built right on the cannon line from a major battle, carried that weight. When we moved in, nothing seemed too bad except for the lack of air conditioning on the top floor and one barely functioning elevator. It wasn't long before things took a turn. The first strange thing that happened one Friday night, my friends had gone out for dinner, but I stayed in to rest before an early volleyball game the next morning. I was sitting on my bed watching TV when a box I had stored under the bed suddenly slid out into the middle of the room. It moved with a deliberate force, enough to make me think someone was under my bed. My heart raced. I hesitated before looking, fully expecting to find someone hiding there. But when I finally worked up the nerve, there was no one. Nothing but empty space. Shaken, I called my friends, and they joked about my food order at first, but quickly realized something was wrong when I started crying. That night, I didn't sleep easily, and that was just the beginning. Soon after, the knocking started. At first, we brushed it off as a typical dorm noise, thin walls, annoying neighbors. But it got worse. It wasn't just random knocks, it was rhythmic, deliberate, and always at night. And the strangest part, it always came from inside our friend group's rooms. We lived in a row of rooms, so we'd gather together, and more than once we'd hear knocking from someone's room, only to realize that person was sitting right next to us. We lived on the top floor, so we knew it could not be anyone above us. Things escalated when one of our friends started experiencing something even creepier. Every night, like clockwork, their door would open around 3 a.m. At first, they assumed it was a prank and started deadbolting the door, but it kept happening. No matter how securely they locked it, the door would still swing open in the middle of the night. The final incident came just before the year ended. My friends next door, the ones whose doors kept opening, went away for the weekend. I had a key to their room and decided to use their Brita filter to fill my water bottle. But the second I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air in the room was heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. It was unsettling enough that I left immediately without even getting the water. When they returned on Sunday, they were met with a sight that freaked us all out. Every single photograph in their room, pictures of friends, family, loved ones, had been turned face down. Some had even been thrown to the floor. No one had been in their room all weekend. I was the only one with an extra key, and I hadn't touched anything. We had no explanation, and one of our best guesses was that the ghosts of the soldiers from the Civil War were haunting us, but we were too scared to ever try and investigate it too far. At the end of the year, we all kind of laughed it off as a bizarre freshman year, but anytime we talk about it now, almost 10 years since graduating, we still get creeped out. I think they are tearing that building down now, so who knows what might happen in that area.
I mean, that's so spooky. If I came back to my dorm and all of my pictures were turned upside down, that would be it. I would have to leave. No more dorm time for me.
The thing is, dorms in themselves are already kind of creepy. Like, especially at MSU, a lot of the buildings are older. They do have new dorms now, but a lot of them are still old buildings. So
for sure.
I feel like if things were actually creepy on top of them, as they already are.
Yeah. Dorms are a spooky place. Spooky story number 2. Growing up, our house definitely had a weird vibe. Our family moved in after my mom married my stepdad when I was about 12. It was way out in the country on a lot of land. My parents' room was upstairs, but the kids all had rooms in the basement. Not super sketchy. It had windows. For a number of years, we would all have individual moments of hearing weird stuff, things being moved around, and thinking you saw something. But around my senior year of high school, things got weirder. It all started with the smell of cigarette smoke. As I said, the house was way out in the country. Our closest neighbor was a half a mile away, but weirdly, we started smelling cigarette smoke at weird times. None of us smoked ever. Early in the morning or when we were eating dinner. Then at night, I started to hear weird noises at my door. We had cats, so I always just thought it was my cat trying to come into my room. I was so confident that was just my cat that I would usually open my door. Nothing was ever there. For some reason, I just ignored it even though I thought it was weird. Then after a few weeks, my sister came running into my room at 2 a.m. freaked out. She was a junior in high school, so not super young or easily spooked. She said she felt like somebody was watching her in the mirror in her closet, and when she turned to look, something started hitting her door. We were super scared and slept upstairs. A couple of days later, my mom was getting ready for work, and she was always up way earlier than us. So she was confused when she saw my brother walking from the upstairs bathroom. She said good morning, but he never answered. She just went about her morning, and then he came upstairs just after waking up. She was so sure it was him, but clearly he had just gotten out of bed. At the time, we were all up, and we smelled cigarette smoke immediately. So finally, we were all talking about what happened, and my stepdad mentioned that the man who had built the house died before finishing it. He smoked a ton and loved the property that we lived on. He told us that his name was Jimmy. From then on, we would just say, "Hi, Jimmy," when weird shit would go down, and slowly things stopped happening. It was so weird, and I truly would have thought it was a lie if I had not had all of those separate incidents happen.
This is kind of like what we were talking about in the episode about the haunted places, like the smelling of the cigarette smoke.
That's what I thought when the minute that I read this story, it made me think about all of those haunted times. But I also think it's funny that as soon as they just acknowledged the ghost, he chilled out, calmed down a little bit.
I feel like sometimes you hear that, like...
Right. If it's a nice ghost, a friendly ghost, if you're just cordial with them, then everything's going to be fine.
And apparently it was.
Good for them.
All right. Spooky story number 3. Every house we have ever lived in has had some kind of paranormal activity. I'm beginning to think that maybe there's some dark entity attached to my mom. We've moved around a lot, so it's kind of strange that we always experience this in every house. The first place we stayed in had major activity. Locked doors would fly open and objects would get chucked around the place. My mom told me that I would talk to people that weren't there. I was 4 at the time. In another house we stayed in, I remember my cousins and I were playing in one of the rooms when we heard deep growling sounds coming from the window. It didn't sound like a dog growling. It was much deeper and sinister. We ran screaming, and still to this day, no one believed us. But one experience I had when I was much older is ingrained in my memory forever. We had moved into another small house. For some reason, the light in my mom's bathroom always fused. It was always dark inside the bathroom. My dog would stare into space at night and growl at something that we couldn't see. One day, we had guests over, and one of our friends got creeped out because he could see a man standing in our hallway staring at everyone. We couldn't see what he was seeing. This invisible man would also keep me awake at night by nudging my shoulder if I fell asleep. I also saw him walk past me once when I was home alone. I thought the paranormal stuff would stop once we moved, but my mom still sees a man from time to time just standing wherever she is.
This story has a lot of key elements that are absolutely terrifying to me. One, their dog just looking and seeing things, growling. That's a real fear of mine. Secondly, their child, well, I guess it was them at the time, 4 years old. I'm sorry. If my kid ever starts saying that they see people,
you're out.
We are leaving.
Moving.
We're going somewhere else. But that's not even working in their case because this seems to be following their mom.
Well, they do say, which is why we were kind of, joking in the episode where we went to the Whitney for the Patreon bonus content.
Yeah.
We were joking in that episode that, like, we're not bringing anything home with us because a lot of times they will say that entities will attach to people or objects, like we're talking about in the Patreon bonus content this week. But they do say that that happens. So I feel like it's probable, like, maybe they should get this mom, like, call a priest for her or sage her or do something because they got to get rid of that.
Yeah, that's tough.
Before we get back to the episode, let's take a scary quick break to thank the sponsor of today's episode, Shopify. If you've ever shopped on justalittleshadypodcast.com, you've experienced the ease of shopping on a website hosted by Shopify. When I started the Just a Little Shady podcast website from scratch, I had no idea that using the Shopify platform would be so easy that I could literally run the entire business from there by myself. That's why I love Shopify. For a business owner, it's super easy to use and it's easy for customers to use, which ultimately means more sales. Shopify makes selling a breeze and checkout a breeze for customers. Shopify lets you sell wherever your customers are, scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. So it makes sense that businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout justalittleshadypodcast.com uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/shady, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/shady to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/shady. Thank you to Shopify for sponsoring today's episode. Now let's get back to some spooky stories.
Shady story. No, this isn't even shady. I mean, maybe it's shady. We don't know. But it certainly is spooky. Spooky story number 4. Back in the day, my friends and I used to walk into abandoned houses and explore them. We lived in a rural area and there were quite a few left standing. We decided to go in one after dark, using lighters for light. Brilliant, I know. It was the early 90s. All 4 of us girls walked onto the old porch, which led into the living room. We couldn't walk that far because the floor was rotted out in spots. We turned around after a couple of minutes and started to walk back to the car. The walkway to the car was overgrown and had bushes on each side. All of a sudden, I hear this low voice yell, "Get the fuck off my property." I've never been so scared in my life. We all started to run, and my best friend ended up being one of those people who does not move quick in the face of terror. So when she took off to run, she knocked me over because she was right behind me. She then proceeded to just lay on me. Mind you, this is only like 5 seconds in that she is laying on me, but I'm so scared that I need to get up now. I ended up being one of those people who turns into a total psycho in the face of fear, and I started yelling, "Bitch, get the fuck off me." Mind you, I have never called her a bitch or anything like that, but it was survival of the fittest at the time. Before I could even get her off me, one of our friends came out of the bushes laughing her butt off. She was the one who yelled. She left the house last, and I guess she went into the bushes and yelled. It was a good prank, but I think she literally gave us all heart palpitations.
So you were actually kind of right. This was shady and spooky.
It was.
Because it was the friend the whole time. I think this is so funny, though, because you always wonder in these situations, are you going to be fight or flight? And clearly in this situation, she was fight and her friend was neither. Quite frankly. And I just think that's so funny. But at least it was a prank. So
thank goodness, because
no
if it
real
wasn't,
danger.
I'm not sure what would have happened in this situation. Things would have not looked good. Me, myself, I think I'm flight. I think I'm out of there. I don't think I'm going to try to defend myself. But who's to say? Hopefully we never encounter it.
Hopefully. Spooky story number 5. So supposedly it happened at my grandparents' old house, which everyone in our family loved, but kind of had an eerie vibe at night. It was big, the wood creaked, and there were a few old paintings that added to its unsettling feel. One evening, my grandparents invited a close friend over for dinner. It was supposed to be an ordinary, pleasant evening until it wasn't. Everything was fine at first, but out of nowhere, their friend began speaking. Not in her usual voice, but in a deep voice, and she was speaking in a language that no one at the table could understand. My uncle, terrified, bolted from his chair and hid in the bathtub. My dad didn't fare much and better and ran straight out of the room as well. My grandmother stayed in the room and tried to calm her down and tried asking what was wrong, but nothing seemed to work, until she asked her if she wanted to lie down and rest. Then that's when the deep, disturbing voice shifted, and suddenly she was talking like a baby. My grandmother led her to bed, tucked her in, and nothing like that had ever happened. Their friend fell asleep. The next morning, their friend had no memory of the incident, not a word about her unsettling transformation. Years later, when my grandmother told me the story, it was already in a different house. By then, she had divorced my grandfather. I'm usually very skeptical of this kind of stuff, but my father and uncle confirmed that it happened. When she finished telling the story, her new boyfriend, who was in another room, suddenly walked in. He looked at us with an odd expression and said, "I hear a lot of movement in the house," before turning and leaving the room again. I didn't know him very well, so I was like, what the heck just happened? Then my grandma just looked at me and said, "He feels spirits." I slept in that very room that night, the one where he heard movement. Needless to say, I didn't get a wink of sleep.
I would have not been able to sleep as well. And I'm seeing a trend in this fight, flight, a lot of flight here.
I was going to say, though, perhaps in this story, the grandmother is the one that has an entity attached to her.
It could be. But the grandpa or the grandmother's boyfriend, he, I think, is the spookiest part of this story.
He didn't need to add his 2 cents.
His 2 cents could have stayed in his head, in his mind. He could have waited till later.
Maybe the grandmother seeked him out, though, because she wanted someone that could sense the spirits so she could know,
she could know herself when to be ready. I mean, that's pretty terrifying. Hearing someone to speak in a completely different tone, voice.
That is, I think, arguably one of the most terrifying part of some of those scary movies where the person gets possessed.
Oh, I don't like it.
That is arguably one of the most terrifying parts, and I can vividly picture that now, and I probably will have nightmares about that. Definitely spooky.
I will not be able to sleep tonight, and that is final. Spooky story number 6. One day I went for a walk in the woods with my brother, and we kept walking and talking. That day we changed paths and at some point got lost and ended up in the middle of the forest. We found footprints there, and there were a few meters further. There was broken shoes that had been ripped open at the front. A meter further, there was a torn shirt and torn pants, and there were flies everywhere. We were scared, but we kept looking around. It was getting darker, and we felt like we were being watched. There were t-shirts and shoes hanging on the trees, and suddenly we heard a crack in the forest. It sounded like somebody was there. We both looked at each other, scared, and ran out of the forest. My thought is after the first pair of shoes, after the first shirt, we're not running out of the forest?
The thing is, I feel like when we were younger and we like wanted to scare ourselves, we'd look for spooky things and like try to
find something out of nothing.
I think like at first maybe that was what it was, like, ooh, footprints, spooky. But then like actually as they went, they were like, wait, there's actually something going on here. And then in their situation, they flew. They they flew.
They flew.
And I think I would have done the same thing. I feel like people need to comment. Are you a fighter or a flighter? Are you running out of there? Or are you staying to see what's going on and fighting your way out? I think we've established we're flyers.
Oh, yes. We're flyers,
Frequent
just like
flyers.
Peter Evans here. We haven't drawn much attention to him, and I just feel like
There were some comments about when we decorated about
the fact that he's back, but that was on the Patreon.
Yeah, but I think people notice.
Well, I hope so. He's a star.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Spooky story number 7. Here's my spooky story about a demonic toy horse. I used to visit my mom and sibling for the summer. In one of the bedrooms, there was a plastic brown toy horse about a foot tall that gave me the absolute creeps. It just had a distinct look and presence to it, with dark, soulless eyes, a lifelike uncanniness, and a slight tilt to its head as if it was trying to make you question your sanity. Well, one night, when I was falling asleep, I looked over at the horse standing on the dresser in the darkest corner of the room, and that creepy feeling turned to growing dread. And I heard that voice that guided and protected me from saying so many things in my life. No matter what you do not look over at that toy horse. And so I didn't. I didn't tell my mom or sibling this. A while down the road, my sibling and I were hanging out in the living room, and Mom was in that same bedroom sleeping. Suddenly, she busts out of the bedroom with the toy horse, holding it as far from her body as possible. I swear to God, this mother effer just turned its head and winked at me. She frantically cried as she opened the front door and threw it off the porch. It stayed there for at least a month, and none of us would touch it or look at it. A couple years after that, they were driving by we were driving by a house and my mom and sibling used to live in that was super wicked and haunted. What really caught our eye as we drove by was standing tall near the fence all by itself as if it was waiting for us to see was a foot-high toy horse that looked exactly like the demonic horse, except this one was white. We were all joking and laughing until we saw that horse, and then the car was completely silent. Someone asked, "Did you see what I saw?" And we all just nodded in agreement. And as we turned the corner to drive past, I could have sworn that through the slats in the fence, I saw the horse's head move to follow us. But maybe I was just seeing things, and maybe that horse was right, and I am insane after all.
I don't think anyone was insane. I think that horse was insane, and y'all should have burned it when you had the chance.
It's exactly what we were saying, that sometimes entities attached to objects. And honestly, this is like one of the things I feel like in a scary movie. Like, you know how there's always like the little ballerina thing that like goes off by itself and it's super creepy?
Yes, and it's like slow motion out of nowhere.
This is that. And also, why did the horse wink at the mom?
I don't like the winking. I don't think that that is funny or clever of the horse.
I don't like anything about it.
But also, I feel like if we were to have burned the horse, it would have just shown up again somewhere, and it would have been even creepier.
Yeah, like arguably, then did you set it free? Like, you want to keep it in there, you know?
Yeah, just remain in the winking horse.
Exactly.
Spooky story number 8. The day started like any other. I was deep into my work when nature called, and I dashed to the restroom. Sitting there, scrolling through my Instagram is when I first heard it. Heavy, labored breathing right outside my door. My first reaction was that my sister must have forgotten to put up the foldable fence to keep the dogs in the living room. "Yuki, stop!" I shouted, expecting a familiar thump of paws retreating. Instead, the breathing continued. Normally, they are very well behaved and I would have been able to get them to leave. However, the breathing and sniffling continued, only not stopping when I stood up. After I washed my hands and left the restroom, I decided to put the fence up myself. That's when I reached the hallway and my blood ran cold. The fence was already put into place, blocking the dogs from being able to leave the living room. A chill crawled up my spine. I turned and I hurried to the living room. Both dogs were sprawled out on the bed, blissfully asleep. The heavy breathing echoed in my mind. If they were asleep and the fence was up, what was that noise? Back in my office, I tried to refocus on my work, but every rustle, every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. It was impossible to focus, and I almost wish I didn't work from home. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, that was the end of it. The dogs are too small to hop over the fence, so I don't think it was them, but whatever it was, it thankfully didn't happen again. I hate it.
I feel like that's super creepy because a lot of times the dogs do go outside the door. And like, imagine right now, like multiple times while we record,
We can hear the dogs.
we can hear the dogs. But like, imagine if we went out there and the dogs were just like sleeping in Evan's office.
I would be spooked, and I would flew.
I would flew as well.
And that's that.
Okay. Spooky story number 9. I was visiting my dad. I had not seen him in a long time, but his brother had passed away, so I went to spend some time with him. One night, I was sleeping, and suddenly my door was open. I woke up and saw a man that I obviously presume was my dad standing there. I asked, "What are you doing?" And he repeated my name a few times and said, "Is that you?" I thought he must be sleepwalking. We have a strained relationship, so I was unsure if perhaps that was the case. He still stood there and started saying, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." And I was like, "What the F? You invited me." And I turned the lights on, and my dad was not standing there. And I was like, "What the hell?" I must have been dreaming, but also scared out of my mind as I realized the man looked more like my uncle who had just passed away. I hid under the covers when I sensed I wasn't still alone, and I looked up and I could see my deceased grandmother and uncle talking, where she told him that not everyone is comfortable seeing ghosts. I turned the lights on and eventually fell asleep. I confirmed with my dad in the morning that it was not him and that he doesn't sleepwalk, and I was super freaked out. My mom then called me to say she also dreamt of my uncle. I don't know if it was subconscious, but I can still see his face and hear his voice to this day when I think of that night.
That is terrifying. And I see that we picked not fight, not flight, maybe a little bit of flight, but hide.
I have done this before.
Have you? See, I feel like in the face of danger, hiding underneath my blankets is not going to save me.
Okay, but I don't know if you've ever been alone in a house. I mean, maybe
Yes, I have.
here, but
Here.
not.
And at home sometimes I'm by myself.
Because I was going to say, if you're by yourself and you get scared, where are you going to go? And then, like, have you ever had the thought, like, if I get out of this bed right now, something's going to grab me from under the bed?
Not necessarily from under the bed. I feel like my fear, because especially in this home, is, and we've talked about Evan's little ghost friend that he makes.
What is not in this home, but continue.
Not in this home, but Evan has seen. And I just can't bring myself to look in certain directions of the room. Like, I will stare at one spot or stare into the TV and hope and pray that if something's happening over there, I'm just not going to see it.
I've done that too, but then also, like, I don't even want to put the sound to the air.
I don't want to put it to the air either.
Okay, but, like, this is the situation where you'd cover your head. Like, are you ever laying there and you're turned to one side and, like, you just feel like if I turn over right now, there's going to be someone, like, right next to me?
Yes.
And then, like, in that instance, you're not moving.
No.
You're not flighting or fighting. And you just have to lay there still and, like, cover your eyes and just pray that you fall asleep.
Right. I just keep my eyes closed.
Right. So, like, in that situation, I'm this person.
And then I just put on, like, a really happy TV show or play a happy song because it's like, I am not going to encounter danger while this song or this show is playing.
That is genuinely why I put on the TV every time I'm home alone, because I'm like, nothing bad can happen when SpongeBob is on.
Right.
Like, nothing bad can happen when Shark Tales is on.
100%. But no, I've definitely been alone in a home and felt fear.
I was thinking more so, like, at home, because, like, with your parents, I feel like you just would go and be like, hey,
Something's
get
going
up,
on.
something's going on. But
I feel like I can remember it wasn't from me like hearing something or seeing something, but I had seen a scary movie earlier in I think I had seen like the new Jigsaw movie or the new Michael Myers movie. One of the two. This was recent. Like, this was in the last 2 years easily.
we talked. I think you might have drunkenly told me this when I was driving you home and you went on about the Joker.
Did I say that I barricaded my door in my room?
Oh, no.
Oh, this was a different time.
Okay.
No, I legit moved heavy furniture in front of my door and the window because I was scared that Michael Myers was coming for me or Jigsaw.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that I did go on and on about.
You told me a story about something like that, but
Like thinking the Joker was genuinely coming for me.
Yeah. There were times when I was younger that I did that, but it was funny because anytime I ever did that when I was younger, it wasn't because I thought a real human was coming. Like, I thought a ghost was coming, and like now looking back on it, wouldn't they just come through the walls?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I did do that a couple times when I was younger.
Oh, well, I'm glad that you grew out of it.
And I thought, like, vividly in those times, I remember thinking, like, how am I going to tie sheets together and, like, get down from my room out of the window?
If you have to get out.
If I have to get out.
I mean, at least you, like,
I thought about it,
plan.
but, like, was I really going to execute it? No.
No, I feel like
I was probably going to go under the covers. So maybe I'm not a fight or a flight. Maybe I'm just a hide.
a hide. That's fair. Hide is fine. I think I genuinely am flight because also sometimes in my car when I'm getting out of it, I'm scared that, you know, the Joker, Michael Myers, somebody is just going to slowly be walking down the sidewalk.
You're
for
freaking
me.
me out. I don't want to think about this.
I
Okay.
feel freaked out too.
Okay, well,
This was a
let's
bad
not-
idea.
This was a bad idea. Well, we're going on tangents off of these spooky stories and relating, and then like now I'm actually picturing real life scenarios for our own selves based on these, and I don't like it. So let's move
forward.
along.
3 more. Oh, it's my turn?
Yeah.
Oh, it is my turn. Hi, everyone. Spooky story number 10. When I was a kid, I am 28 now. I was at my mom's house for Halloween, and I saw a spooky girl on my bedroom wall. And I was getting ready to go trick-or-treating when I stood there in shock. Because I don't know what to do, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I left to go trick-or-treating, and when I came back home from trick-or-treating, the girl was still there. It's like she was just staring at me for some reason, and I don't know why. I thought it was my imagination just making things up. So I blinked my eyes there for a few seconds, and the girl was still there, and I didn't know what to do. So I closed my bedroom door and went downstairs, and I didn't tell anyone the story, not even my family.
This I don't totally understand because, like, what do you mean there was someone in your room and you went back in there and you stayed in there? Like,
I can't relate because I would have never gone back in that room.
right. Like,
Ever.
if you got the courage to leave the scenario, why would you go back in there alone? I would have been, like, dragging someone else in there with me. Like, you need to see this, too.
The logic of just, I blinked my eyes a few times thinking it'd go away. And I don't know, when I picture this story in my head, I just think of somebody so chill, so nonchalant. Like, I don't even feel like they were fazed by this. They're like, there's that girl there. I guess I'm going to go trick-or-treating. I'll be back. Comes back, oh, the girl's still there. Blinks a couple times. I'm going to leave. And that was it?
Yeah.
That was all we did?
There wasn't a lot of, there was not a lot of reaction here that I feel like this is a scenario that deserved a huge reaction. So, I mean, maybe good for you. Maybe you don't panic in those situations.
Yeah, they chose to be nonchalant.
Spooky story number 11. My freakiest experience was only about a year ago. I put my son to bed in his cot, who at the time was about 18 months old. I walked out of the room for a few minutes and then returned. After walking into his room to say goodnight, he stares straight past me and starts waving to something behind me. It's only a small room and definitely no one else was in the room. The strangest part is that it was close to the first anniversary of losing my mom, who was my rock. Maybe it should have been comforting, but it still freaks me out a bit now.
I love the idea that it was her mom. Like, those kinds of things I feel like bring a lot of peace and comforting, but without a definitive sign, who are we to say it was?
Well, maybe I'll read this last story too because the same person wrote in both of these.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm starting to think maybe it was because there's another situation.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. So the last story, which is the same person who wrote in the last one. A few months after my mom passed away, on what would have been their 40th wedding anniversary, my dad had a few odd experiences. The main one we remember is the living room DVD player, after not being used for months, randomly started up all by itself and started playing. And the DVD in it was my mom's favorite movie, Polar Express. After my dad turned it off, about a half hour later, it did it again. My dad got a bit freaked out and then told my mom off. Her ashes are in his front room.
Oh, then it was definitely the mom. She's
seems
hanging
like
out.
She's got some energy.
Providing
She can,
signs.
yeah, like she can provide signs. So, and especially if it was like close to the 40th wedding anniversary, close to the 1 year anniversary.
Absolutely.
She's kind of like, hey, don't forget about me on these anniversaries.
Aw, well, that I love. What a good positive note to end on.
I agree. I love it. Well, that concludes this week's episode and all the spooky stories from this season. Honestly, I really liked kind of compiling them all together.
I did too. Even though it freaked me out a little bit, I'm still going to be a little nervous.
I think it was more freaky than it when we read them separately.
It
but
created such a spooky vibe.
Definitely. We're going to be thinking about this after. But that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.